There is a kind of quiet that falls over a man when he realizes that everything he trusted was conditional, not loud, not dramatic, just a silence. The kind that lands on your chest like a stone and doesn't move. That's where this story begins. Not with a crime, not with a weapon, with a manila folder, a courtroom, and a signed birthday card that said 4 words Dale Merritt thought would protect him for the rest of his life. 4 words that would end up meaning absolutely nothing. And if you've ever opened your home, your table, your trust to a woman's family, then what happened to Dale Merritt is something you need to hear all the way to the end. Because the gift was real. The warmth was real. And then, one day, the bill arrived. Dale Merritt walked into that courtroom carrying 17 years of marriage in a manila folder. Bank statements, photographs, a signed birthday card that said, and I want you to really hear this, from our family to yours, no strings attached. He thought those 4 words would save him. He had no idea how wrong he was. His mother-in-law had given him this house. She said it herself, signed the paperwork herself, smiled at the closing table herself. And then, 17 years later, she sued him to take it all back. $214,000. That's what 17 years of being part of the family cost Dale Merritt. And that number? That was just the opening bid. Stay with me, because by the time this story is over, you're going to question every single gift you've ever accepted from someone else's family. Before we go any further, we want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, before we get into how Dale ended up in that courtroom, I need you to sit with a question for a moment. If someone puts money in your hand, a real amount, not a small gesture, and they sit across from you at a table, look you in the eye, and say the words, "This is for you," no strings attached, at what point does it stop being a gift? Is it the moment a marriage ends? Is it when the relationship turns cold? Or is a gift the way a promise is a promise? Something that doesn't have an expiration date? Because the answer to that question is what this entire story hinges on. The law has an opinion. Gloria Fane had her own. And for Dale, the answer cost him 2 years of his life and nearly everything he'd built. Tonight, we are going to walk through 3 things. First, what exactly did Gloria Fane give Dale Merritt, and what did she say when she gave it? Second, what made her believe 17 years later that she had the legal standing to demand it all back? And third, and this is the one that should concern every man watching this, was she close to being right? Because here's what nobody told Dale before that trial started. Somewhere in the stack of discovery documents, buried in an email chain that Howard Voss never intended Patricia Okafor to read, was a sentence that changed everything. A sentence that didn't just reveal a legal strategy, it revealed how long this had been planned. We'll get there. But first, let's go back to where this story actually starts. Let's go back to Columbus, Ohio, 1998. Dale Merritt was not a complicated man. He grew up in a small house in central Ohio, the second of 3 boys, the son of a factory worker and a woman who cleaned offices on weekends to make sure there was enough in the account every month. He didn't grow up poor, exactly, but he grew up knowing the weight of money, what it took to earn it, what it meant to lose it, and what it felt like to work for something with your hands and then actually have it. He went to trade school because that's what made sense. By 24, he had his contractor's license and a small crew doing residential remodels across Franklin County. By 28, he had built a reputation as the kind of contractor people called back, on time, under budget, no corners cut. He wasn't rich. He was never going to be rich. But he was building something, piece by piece, the old-fashioned way. In the fall of 1998, Dale Merritt met a woman named Renee at a hardware store in Columbus. He helped her load a sheet of drywall into the back of her car. She laughed at something he said. She asked for his card. He gave it to her and told himself he'd probably never hear from her again. 2 days later, she called about a renovation estimate. 3 months later, he stopped being her contractor. And 2 years after that, he stood at the front of a church in Westerville, Ohio, in a rented suit that was just slightly too short in the sleeves, and he married her. The wedding was small, 40 people. Renee's mother, Gloria Fain, sat in the front row. She cried before the ceremony even started. She held Dale's face in both hands after the vows and told him he was family now. He believed her. He had absolutely no reason not to. Gloria Fain was a widow. Her husband, Ed Fain, had passed in 1996 after a brief illness, leaving behind a paid-off home in a quiet suburb north of Columbus, 2 rental properties, and somewhere in the range of $800,000 in liquid assets, money that had been carefully accumulated over 40 years of Ed's career in manufacturing management and Gloria's decades of meticulous household bookkeeping. Gloria had 1 child, Renee. And to Gloria, Renee's happiness was not just a priority, it was the only project that mattered. She had poured everything into that girl since Ed died, her time, her attention, her financial resources, her emotional energy. Renee was everything she had left. So when Renee brought home a man who was hard-working and polite and called her ma'am the first 3 times they met, Gloria opened her arms wide. She was not just welcoming a son-in-law, she was investing in the continuation of her world. The gifts started the way they always do, small enough to feel like love rather than leverage. For Dale's first birthday as Renee's husband, Gloria gave him a professional-grade set of power tools. Not a big box store set, a real set, the kind a contractor actually uses. Dale thanked her genuinely and kept them in his truck for years. The following winter, after a bad ice storm knocked out their power for 6 days, Gloria showed up with a brand-new generator still in the box, saying she couldn't sleep knowing they were sitting in a cold house. When Dale's truck finally gave out on a job site in 2002, engine blown, not worth fixing, Gloria handed them the keys to a used F-150 she'd sourced through a neighbor and said nothing more about it. Each time, the generosity felt organic, natural, the way family is supposed to work. Nobody used the word loan, nobody used the word investment, nobody said anything that sounded like a condition. Then, in the summer of 2004, 6 years into the marriage, Gloria did something that changed the entire shape of this story. She wrote a check for $60,000 toward the down payment on Dale and Renee's first home, a 3-bedroom house on a quiet street in Gahanna, Ohio. Good school district, decent yard, the kind of house you raise a life in. Gloria was at the closing table. She signed where the attorney asked her to sign. She shook hands with the real estate agent. She took photographs on a disposable camera, and according to 2 people who were in that room, the buyer's agent and Renee's college roommate who had come along to celebrate, when Dale thanked Gloria and asked if she was sure, Gloria put her hand on his arm and said, "This is your home now, yours and hers. I just wanted to help you get started." Those were her words. Your home. I just wanted to help you get started. Dale filed them away the way you file away something that doesn't need filing. As a simple fact of life, something good that happened on a good day. Now here is the detail that matters, and I want you to hold it in your mind as we go forward. Because this is where the real story lives, not in the courtroom, not in the lawyer's offices, but in this quiet moment that nobody thought to document. When Gloria said those words at the closing table, she had already been keeping records. Not a formal loan agreement, not a promissory note, nothing that would require a signature or a conversation. Just a leather-bound ledger, the kind you'd find at an office supply store, where Gloria had been writing down every dollar she'd ever given or transferred to Dale and Renee since the wedding. Not to celebrate her own generosity, not to track whether it had done any good. She was building a paper trail. She was constructing, in careful handwritten columns, the architecture of a future claim. And on the day she said, "This is your home now," and smiled for that disposable camera, she went home, opened that ledger, and wrote down $60,000 with a date. She didn't tell anyone, not Renee, not Dale, not a soul. The marriage between Dale and Renee Merritt did not end in a single catastrophic moment. There was no affair discovered, no dramatic confrontation, no police call that the neighbors still talk about. What happened was slower and in some ways harder. Two people who had built separate internal lives inside the same house gradually stopped pretending those lives had much in common. Renee had grown close again with her mother over the years in ways that felt normal at first. Weekly dinners, Sunday phone calls, shared vacations. But somewhere around 2014 or 2015, Dale started noticing that conversations he'd had with Renee on Monday would be referenced by Gloria on Wednesday, sometimes with details added or angles shifted. He noticed that when he and Renee had a disagreement, Gloria would call within 24 hours with a comment that tracked a little too closely to Renee's version. He didn't say much about it. He was a man who processed things quietly, but he noticed. By early 2017, the marriage was functionally over in all but paperwork. They were civil. They shared the house, shared the expenses, shared the calendar. But the warmth that had been there in Westerville in 2000 had been gone for a long time. In the spring of 2017, Renee told Dale she wanted a divorce. Dale agreed. They hired separate attorneys. The process was surprisingly efficient. No children to argue over, no business to value, a relatively straightforward asset picture. The house had appreciated significantly. Dale had built real equity through years of payments and his own hands-on maintenance. The marital settlement agreement gave Dale the house. Renee received the liquid savings account and her share of the investment portfolio they'd built together over 17 years. Their attorneys shook hands. The judge signed the paperwork in late 2018. Dale walked out of the courthouse on a Tuesday afternoon, drove home, and stood in his driveway for a long time, looking at the house he'd lived in for 14 years. He thought it was over. He thought wrong. 11 weeks after the divorce was finalized, on a Thursday morning before Dale left for a job site, a certified mail truck pulled up in front of his house. He signed for the envelope. He put it on the passenger seat of his truck. He opened it at a red light on Morse Road and read the return address: Voss and Chambers, Attorneys at Law, Columbus, Ohio. He pulled into a parking lot. He read the letter once quickly and then sat very still. Then he read it again slowly, and then a third time, looking for the part where this was a mistake. The letter informed him that Gloria Fain, his former mother-in-law, was filing a civil lawsuit against him in Franklin County Common Pleas Court. The legal theory was unjust enrichment. The argument was that every dollar Gloria had ever transferred, to both of them or to Dale directly across nearly 20 years of marriage, had never been a gift. It had always been a loan, an implied arrangement, a conditional support structure tied to the survival of the marriage. And now that the marriage was over, she wanted every dollar back. The amount demanded was $214,000. Now, before we go any further with the legal side of this, I want you to understand something about the doctrine of unjust enrichment because it is central to why this case was even possible. Under American civil law, unjust enrichment is a claim that arises when one party receives a benefit at the expense of another in circumstances where it would be fundamentally unfair to allow that party to keep the benefit without paying for it. It is not a contract claim. It does not require a written agreement or even a spoken one. It is an equity claim, meaning it is built on what a court considers fair rather than what was formally agreed to. Legal experts across the country have noted that the line between a gift and an implied loan can be dangerously thin, particularly in family relationships where money flows informally and nothing is ever written down. Gloria Fain and her attorney Howard Voss understood this perfectly. The absence of a formal loan agreement wasn't a problem for them. It was the strategy. Patricia Okafor had spent 15 years handling civil litigation with a specialty in financial disputes that crossed family lines, the kind of cases that fall between family court and civil court, where nobody is quite sure which rules apply. When Dale walked into her office with his folder and his letter and his bewildered expression, she listened to the whole story without writing anything down. Then she said two things. First, this is a real case. She's not bluffing, and Voss is not a bluffing kind of attorney. Second, what documentation do you have? Dale had the closing documents on the house. He had the signed birthday cards, including one from 2009 that specifically said, "No strings attached." He had a handful of text messages he'd saved for reasons he couldn't fully explain. Just a habit of keeping things. He had the names of two people who were at the closing table and heard Gloria's words. Against that, Patricia told him, Gloria had a ledger going back 22 years. Every dollar, every date, every transfer. Organized, chronological, meticulous. "You are in a fight," Patricia told him. "Let's make sure you win it." Howard Voss filed the civil complaint on a Monday. By Friday, a local Columbus news blog that monitored unusual court filings had picked up the story. By the following Tuesday, the headline had spread to 2 regional newspapers and 1 national personal finance website. Ohio man sued by ex-mother-in-law for return of 2 decades of family gifts. The comment sections filled immediately. Some people were outraged on Dale's behalf. Some took Gloria's side, arguing that a mother had every right to protect her financial interests. A handful of personal finance commentators weighed in, pointing out that this was a documented pattern in American family law. Parents who give informally, keep records privately, and then attempt to reclaim transfers after a marriage ends. Civil attorneys from 3 different states gave on-the-record quotes about how the line between gift and loan is one of the most contested gray areas in American civil litigation. And Dale Merritt, sitting in his house in Gahanna, Ohio, tried to stay off the internet and focus on Patricia's instructions. Find every piece of paper. Remember every conversation and trust the process. Here is where this story does something that most stories about money and family try to avoid. It splits in 2, because there are genuinely 2 versions of the same 19 years, and I want to give you both of them, not to be fair for the sake of appearances, but because the truth in this case genuinely lives somewhere between the 2 versions. And the only way you're going to understand what happened in that courtroom is if you understand why both of these people believed, completely and without doubt, that they were right. Gloria Fane's version was built on a foundation of practical family economics. She had never used the word gift internally, not once. In her mind, every dollar she had transferred to Dale and Renee had been an investment in a family unit that she was a part of. The $60,000 down payment had been discussed with Renee, she would later claim, as a family loan, money that would eventually be returned to the family estate in some form, whether through inheritance planning or direct repayment. The smaller transfers were framed in Gloria's internal language as support with the expectation of stability. As long as the family remained intact, the support continued. The moment the family dissolved, the support became recoverable. In Gloria's mind, that was not a reinterpretation. That was always the deal. Dale's version was equally simple and equally certain. No one had ever used the word loan, not once. Not in a casual conversation, not in a serious one, not in a phone call, not in a text message, not at a closing table, not at a Christmas dinner. Nobody had ever handed him a repayment schedule. Nobody had ever asked him to sign a promissory note. Nobody had ever said in any form that any of this came with a condition. The gifts were given openly, warmly, in front of witnesses, with words like, "This is yours," and "No strings attached to them." He had built his life around those transfers the way you build a life around facts, not promises, not expectations, facts. And now, years later, a woman who had called him son was using a private ledger to rewrite 19 years of Christmas mornings. Two completely different realities. Same money, same table, same 19 years. And somewhere between those two realities, a jury was going to have to decide which version of the past was true. The discovery phase of a civil trial is where cases are actually won or lost, long before any jury ever sits down. It is the phase where both sides are legally required to produce relevant documentation, emails, records, financial statements, communications, and turn them over to the other side. It is dry. It is procedural. It is also, in this case, where Gloria Fane's entire legal strategy began to come apart. Patricia Okafor received a batch of documents from Howard Voss's office in the early weeks of discovery. The batch was large, hundreds of pages of financial records, bank statements, ledger entries, correspondence. It had been compiled hastily, Patricia noted, as if Voss's team had cast a wide net and included more than they intended. Most of it was exactly what she expected. The ledger entries, the transfer records. The financial timeline Gloria had been building for 2 decades, but buried in the batch, included because one of the emails in the chain referenced a specific cash transfer amount, was a series of personal emails from Gloria's account, and Patricia read every one of them. In an email chain dated November 14th, 2017, approximately 8 weeks before the divorce papers were filed by Renee's attorney, Gloria wrote to Renee, "Once it's done, we move forward with Voss. He says the ledger is enough. We just need to make sure Dale doesn't get a lawyer before the filing." Read that again. "We just need to make sure Dale doesn't get a lawyer before the filing." That is not a grieving mother trying to recover money she believes is rightfully hers. That is a coordinated legal strategy, planned in advance, between a mother and a daughter who was still legally married to the man they were planning to sue. It means that while Dale and Renee were still technically working through their divorce settlement, while he was still signing papers, still negotiating in good faith, Gloria had already retained Howard Voss. The lawsuit was not a reaction to the divorce. It was built alongside it. And the woman across the settlement table from Dale's attorney had already been working with her mother's legal team on the plan that would follow. Now remember, I told you earlier that someone in Dale's corner had been communicating with Howard Voss's office before the lawsuit was served. That someone was a man named Terry Calloway. Terry had known Dale for 30 years. They'd worked on job sites together in their 20s. Terry had been at the wedding. He'd helped Dale move into that house in Gahanna with a rented truck and 2 cases of beer. He'd been at Thanksgiving dinners at Gloria's table. He was, in every meaningful sense of the word, Dale's oldest friend. Patricia's document review revealed that Terry had been in contact with Howard Voss's office on 3 separate occasions in the 4 weeks before the lawsuit was served. The specific content of those conversations was legally privileged and could not be compelled. But the fact of the contact, the phone records, the timing, the pattern, was not protected. When Dale confronted Terry about it, Terry admitted he had spoken with Voss. He said he'd been asked about Dale's finances, about whether Dale had a lawyer yet, about whether he seemed like the kind of man who would fight or settle. Terry said he'd answered honestly because he thought he was being helpful. Dale thanked him, walked out of that conversation, and never called Terry again. The red herrings came next, the way they always do when a story goes public. 2 individuals appeared online claiming to have similar experiences with Gloria Fane, that she had lent money to family members of other men Renee had dated and then attempted to recover it after those relationships ended. Neither claim could be verified, and one of them was eventually traced to a single person operating 2 accounts. A former employee of Dale's contracting business gave an interview to a local podcast saying that Dale had, quote, always known the money was a loan and had joked about it at a job site. Patricia tracked down every worker on that site from that period. Not one of them remembered any such conversation. The former employee, it turned out, had been let go by Dale 3 years earlier for failing to show on a job that cost Dale a client. The noise was everywhere: comments, headlines, takes, counterclaims, internet legal experts who had never read a single page of the actual documents. Patricia told Dale to stay off the internet entirely and focus on what was real. The signal was in the documents. The documents were damning, and Patricia was about to use them. Patricia Okafor built her defense around 3 pillars, and I want to walk you through each one because together they tell a story that no ledger in a leather notebook could contradict. The first pillar: no written loan agreement existed for any transfer at any point over any of the 19 years in question. Not for the $60,000 down payment, not for the truck, not for the generator, the tools, the HVAC unit, the cash envelopes at Christmas. Not a single promissory note, not a single signed acknowledgement of debt, not a single document with the word repayment anywhere in it. Legal experts have consistently noted that for a gift to be reclassified as a loan under civil law, there must be evidence of a mutual understanding, not a private ledger that only one party knows exists. The documentation had to go both ways. It didn't. Pillar number 2. The closing documents on the Gahana home contained no lien, no encumbrance, no language of any kind suggesting that the $60,000 contribution was a debt owed to Gloria Fain. It was recorded as a gift at the closing table, and the 2 real estate professionals who witnessed it were both prepared to testify about what they heard Gloria say that day. "This is your home now. I just wanted to help you get started." The third pillar was the November 2017 email, and this was not just a piece of evidence. It was, Patricia argued, proof of premeditation, proof that the lawsuit had been conceived before the divorce was finalized, while Dale was still negotiating in good faith, while he was still a husband, not yet a defendant. That email established, with a timestamp and a paper trail, that Gloria and Renee had coordinated their legal plans during the marriage and had specifically discussed the advantage of moving before Dale could retain counsel. Patricia filed a motion to amend Dale's defense to include a counterclaim: civil conspiracy. The argument was straightforward, that 2 parties had conspired to use a civil legal action not as a legitimate recovery of a debt, but as a weapon against a man they knew could not easily fight back, deployed at the most vulnerable possible moment in his life. Howard Voss had 48 hours to respond to the motion. He responded in 36. He called Patricia's office. He wanted to talk about a settlement. The settlement offer that Howard Voss put on the table was, in its own way, the most revealing moment of the entire case. He offered $0, no money exchanged hands in either direction. Both sides cover their own legal fees. All claims withdrawn. Walk away. Think about that. Gloria Fain had filed a $214,000 civil complaint. She had retained one of Columbus's more aggressive civil litigators. She had spent months building a case she'd been planning since before the divorce was filed, and when Patricia filed the conspiracy counterclaim, the number went from $214,000 to 0 in 36 hours. Patricia brought the offer to Dale. Dale sat with it for a full day. A real day, 24 hours, not a figure of speech. He thought about his legal fees, which were already approaching $20,000. He thought about the time. He thought about walking away clean with his house and his name. And then he thought about the November email, about the ledger, about what it meant that someone who called him family for 19 years had been building a legal case against him while sitting at his Christmas table. He told Patricia no. He wanted the court to hear the full story. He wanted it on the record. The trial lasted 4 days in the spring of 2021. Patricia presented the closing documents, the birthday cards, the testimony of the 2 real estate professionals from the 2004 closing, the absence of any loan agreement across 19 years, and the November 2017 email. Howard Voss argued that the email had been taken completely out of context, that moving forward with Voss had simply meant initiating a loan recovery process that Gloria had always planned as a last resort, and that a mother had every right to protect her financial interests after years of generous support. He leaned heavily on the ledger. He called it evidence of consistent, documented intent. Patricia called it a private record that Dale had never seen, never agreed to, and had no obligation to honor. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned a verdict in Dale Merritt's favor on every count. The unjust enrichment claim was dismissed. The house stayed with Dale. The counterclaim of civil conspiracy was not pursued to judgment at Patricia's recommendation. She believed the verdict itself was enough, and that a prolonged appeals process served no one. Dale paid approximately $28,000 in legal fees. Gloria Fane's legal costs were reported to be considerably higher. Renee was not in the courtroom when the verdict was read. Dale Merritt still lives in that house in Gahanna, Ohio. He repainted the front door the summer after the trial. He says it needed it. He has not spoken to Gloria Fane since the divorce was filed. He has not spoken to Terry Calloway since the day he walked out of that conversation. His contracting business is still operating. His crew still shows up on time. Here is what I keep returning to, the thing that I can't stop thinking about when I walk through this story from beginning to end. The gifts were real. Every single one of them was real. The generator, the tools, the truck, the $60,000, the Christmas envelopes, all of it was real. Gloria gave those things with real hands in real rooms, in front of real people. And then one decision, one ending, and a ledger appeared where a family used to be. I don't think this was ever about the money. Not really. I think it was about something much older and much harder to name. I think it was about the belief that generosity, when given strategically, creates ownership. That if you give enough, and you track it carefully enough, the person you gave it to belongs to you in some permanent way. And when Dale walked out of that courtroom with his name intact and his house still under his feet, what Gloria lost wasn't $214,000. It was the claim, the one she'd been building in that ledger for 22 years, the one that said he was hers to collect. So I want to ask you something before we close out tonight. And I genuinely want you to think about it before you answer, not just react. Where is the line between generosity and leverage? When someone gives you something, truly gives it, says the words, signs the paper, smiles for the photograph. At what point does a ledger in a private drawer change what that moment meant? Is it possible to give a gift and mean it in the moment and then mean something else entirely years later when the circumstances change? And if the answer to that last question is yes, then what does any of it mean? What does any act of generosity actually mean if the person giving it is also the person who decides, alone, in private, whether it was ever really given at all? Leave your answer below. I read every single one. And I'll tell you this. The responses to this story have already started coming in, and some of them are going to make your jaw drop in either direction. Some of you are going to say Gloria had every right. Some of you are going to say what was done to Dale should be a crime. I want to hear from both sides, because the truth in this story is not comfortable, and comfortable stories don't teach you anything. If this made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And next week, we are covering the case of a man whose stepfather quietly rewrote a will 48 hours before he passed, and the family didn't find out the truth until they were standing at the graveside. Subscribe so you don't miss it, because trust me, that one is going to hit differently.